Okay, welcome everybody to the Stageable State of the Stage podcast. My name is Benjamin Reed. I am your host. I'm the founder and CEO of Stageable, www.stageable.com, and I am joined today by probably one of my favorite actors I have ever had the pleasure of working with, James Keegan. James, welcome.
Thanks, Ben. It's good to be with you. Thank you for the
That's,
compliment. That's very touching. I appreciate it.
I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true.
No, that's what makes it mean a lot to me. I know that you wouldn't.
Well, my friend, I know you quite well, but the people listening may not. So the first thing, would you just give us a little bit about you, a little bit about your background?
Sure. I was born and grew up in New York City. I was as far as acting goes, I was very attracted to acting when I was younger. I acted in high school and college, and I ended up not following that path. I ended up following a literature path, English literature, and pursued that in graduate school and ended up teaching. So I'm an English professor at the University of Delaware on a small satellite campus down near the Delaware beaches. Been doing that for 30 years, but always missed acting. Started in my 30s to come back and do community theater, and then realized that I was that most horrible of animals in community theater. I was the guy who took it too seriously, because I really wanted to do it, the way I wanted to do it, and I wanted to do it. I had found my tribe, but I was looking for, you know, the headhunters of the tribe. I was looking for the killers, So and just people who had the same investment in it that I did. The beautiful thing about community theater is that it's primarily and first and foremost about community. But I wanted to be with a group that was primarily about performance and the quality of the performance and the collaboration. And it's not saying that you can't have really high quality community theater. That's not what I mean to imply. But I just wanted to test it out and see if I could really test myself and see if I could, make a go of it at a professional level. And so in my 30s, that's what I did. I did a little bit of training at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. They had a summer intensive training program that later on blossomed into a graduate program at George Washington University. So I was sort of the last class of the summer program. And interestingly, both my son and my daughter-in-law, both of whom are or have been actors, both graduated from that program later on in classical acting. So, which is an interesting kind of link up. But anyway, after that, I started to look for jobs with acting where I could still maintain my teaching at the same time. And I teach on a campus that's very teaching heavy. It has a 4-3 load, so it's very challenging because there's so many times I have to be in the classroom each week. But luckily, when I started to pursue this, my wife was an interim head of the program, interim faculty coordinator, and so she moved my schedule over so that I did all my teaching in one day or 1.5 days. So it would be three-hour classes in one day and another 3-hour class on the next morning. So 3 classes on a Monday and 1 on a Tuesday, and I got several jobs, and a couple of them Shakespearean, but then I landed a job with the American Shakespeare Center. It was then Shenandoah Shakespeare Express, and that was in 2004. Jim Warren, the artistic director at that time, was willing to work with me and my teaching schedule, and hired me, and then just continued to hire me as part of the resident company. That's where you and I worked together later on, years later. But I've worked pretty steadily there between 2004 and 2016. I did take some seasons off, but I was generally in the summer fall season is what we called it at the time. I did a couple of Renaissance seasons, 3 of them actually in the winter months. But I was still teaching during a lot of that period. The summers were easier because I wasn't teaching in the summers, but fall and spring were challenging. I'd go back and forth. So I'd do 8 performances from Tuesday night through Sunday at 5, and then I would drive home 5 hours Sunday, teach my courses Monday and Tuesday and go back, and I would be clinically exhausted by Christmas, when the season ended. And I look back on it now, and I'm not quite sure how I did it, but I was very grateful to be able to keep my teaching job, which I love and which pays the mortgage steadily, and to get to do the thing I love most, which is to perform, largely classical theater, but that's not all I've done. And I have worked at other theaters too. I've been able to work at it. Wasn't just the American Shakespeare Center, but I've worked at other regional theaters as well, and been really fortunate in that. And but I from 2004 to 2016, I worked pretty steadily, taking a couple of seasons off here and there. And then I returned a couple of other times to ASC to do some more seasons. So um, between 2004 and 2021, I guess I've worked there, quite a bit. But I also have worked at the Folger Shakespeare Theater at Theater Works in Colorado Springs. I've worked in South Carolina. I've worked in Pittsburgh. So I have worked with other theaters and done a lot of driving and kept some crazy hours, but I've made it work. So I think that's sort of the short version. I've been really fortunate with the American Shakespeare Center. I got to play a lot of really great roles. And the great thing about starting late like I did and getting hired by a company that had a resident company that worked in rotating rep was that I'd be hired for a season to do 4 or 5 plays in rotation with 11 or 12 other cast members. And so for a guy who started late, I have a resume that looks like I didn't. It looks like I started when I was 20, because I've done so much work in that time, so many plays and so many roles. And the people at ASC, Jim Warren in particular, and Ralph Allen Cohen, the founders, were very good to me in casting. I got to do a lot of really, really wonderful roles and work with just some terrific actors. Some of the greatest memories of my life are from that place.
So I definitely knew that you were teaching at the same time,
Mhm.
but having this conversation with you is jogging my memory, and I'm remembering. And now I was a much younger man back when we met each other, and I don't
So,
think I quite realized the workload that you were under, and how exhausting that must have been.
well, the
Can't,
interesting thing about that, I'm glad to hear you say that, because it means I didn't whine about it too much. And that was sort of the deal I made with myself. I sort of said to myself, you get to do this now. You get to live your dream, and you get to continue to have this good, solid job that you love in teaching. And so the one thing you don't get to do is bellyache about it. You go and do it. And, I mean, my wife heard me bellyache on occasion, but even she would say, not too much. Um, so because it was a deal I made with myself, that, and so I'm gratified to hear you say that. But yeah, sometimes it felt a little nuts, and with driving, you had to be really careful. I would pull off the road sometimes and nap for a bit, because
right.
you get that moment, you're like, this is not safe. I need to rest. But,
Well, and there's so many people in the arts, be it theater or other performers or just artists in general, who they are not able to pursue a career in the thing that they love because it's not lucrative enough for whatever their needs might be, personally, for their family. And do you do you think that that is a problem that needs solving, or do you think that's a natural occurrence of the love of creating, you know, story and whatnot?
well, I mean, I wish that in some ways we lived in a culture that cared a little bit more about the arts in a political way. You know what I mean? That there was better subsidizing of the arts and support of the arts that you do see in some other cultures, so that, I mean, so I suppose that's true. I live with a writer, so poet and prose writer, and my wife has a book of short stories coming out next month, and I just she has a whole bunch of writer friends, and they're friends of mine too, and we talk, and it's I have painter friends, and it's the same. in all the arts, it's like most people I know that don't, who are artists, they don't make their living at it. They, it's their vocation, but they also have their avocation. I'm not sure how I feel about that. It's a great question. I just know so many people in the arts. There's so few people who are able to make their sole living doing the art that they care about. But I have a good painter friend from high school. Ann and I bought one of his paintings for ourselves as a Christmas gift. And I got back in touch with him in recent years through social media. It's wonderful to have his friendship again. But he's a lawyer. He makes
Mm,
his money as a lawyer during the day, but painting is the thing that he loves most. And I just think that it's something that you know. Uh, I don't know that I've questioned it a whole lot because I see it so often as the case. And I get it too. I get like why, how many plays are there out there? And there's a whole bunch of people that feel passion towards the art. That the art is sort of where our soul lives. And I really believe that's true. I sometimes say that I have two of the most ridiculous jobs in the world. I get up on a stage and I pretend to be somebody I'm not. And then I get up in front of a bunch of young people and I talk about made up stories and poems and plays,
mm,
and if on from one perspective, that looks nuts, you know what I mean? But from another perspective, it's like when we get time, when we have put food on the table, when all that happens, we return to story and we return to art and we return to expression of our emotions. And those are the things that make us most human and the things that we value. So I think it's not surprising that people that I in my 30s came back to acting and said, I got to do this. I don't know. I don't
mhm.
understand why, but I don't care why. I just know that it feeds me in some way. It feeds who I genuinely am at my core.
Yeah.
So I suppose I always said to myself when I started back to it, it's sort of Sean Connery in The Untouchables talking to Elliot Ness. He's like, "What are you prepared to do?" You know, and that's
Mm.
that's sort of what I ask myself. What are you prepared to do?
Right.
I don't have to face Al Capone as they did in the movie, but it was just a matter of like, well, how much are you willing to sacrifice to enjoy doing this? And for me. I've said this to you before. I love performance. I love being up in front of an audience. But what I learned over the years is that what I love most is the rehearsal room. I love to be with like-minded people who care about it the way I care about it, trying to build the thing together. And I write too, and I paint as well. And I'm looking forward to doing those in retirement when I retire from teaching, to dedicating more time to those things. But there's nothing quite like that rehearsal room collaboration, because
Mm,
we're going to do a scene from Macbeth and I know what I'm bringing, but I have no idea what you're bringing, what somebody else in the room is bringing. And the real challenge to me is to be available to that, to be open enough, in my own choices to receive what's there and let it change me,
mm.
and so,
Yeah.
I always teach, when I teach drama, I always talk about the origins of drama in the West and the fact that it arises out of sacred spaces, out of the city Dionysia in ancient Athens, and out of the Catholic Mass in medieval Christendom, and that I think that sacredness is about transformation, and what we
Mm,
feel in the theater is we feel transformed. There's nothing like being at live theater. Whenever I take some of my students here especially here in rural Delaware, I take them to a professional performance. It's amazing their reaction, like they've never been to
mm,
anything like that in their lives, and they're blown away. And
mm.
yeah, it's great. I think I went off tangent. I don't know that I even came close to answering your question, but
Well, what I was one of the things that was interesting, you were talking about what are you willing to do? And it made me think of the quote, you can have everything you want, you just can't have it all at once.
yeah,
There's a trade-off to pursuing this, and for me, I've found it's very incompatible with raising a family. The schedules are all wrong, and it's kind of like the service industry in that you are working when other people are not working, and so your life is inverted, and your days off are the typical weekend is when you're at your kind of peak.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well, I mean, I have actors in the family, and my son, was an actor for years, a very successful actor in D.C., and even made it to Broadway with Slave Play. He was an understudy, but he got to go on a few times, and his career was sort of taking off at the time that COVID hit, and he did some plays online during COVID, but after that, he decided to, take a different career path. But my daughter-in-law, his wife, is still a performer, and they have a 10-year-old son, my grandson. And right now, Alyssa, they were doing a show at studio. Their pronouns are they, them. So I'll be using those just so people don't get confused. Um, and at Studio Theater in DC, and then flipped over into a contract to do 12th Night at the Folger, which they're in the midst of now. And my son is in a sales job now that is very demanding with appointments. And, it takes a village. Grandparents have been called in, so either Alyssa's parents have come from Michigan, her mom, their mom has come from Michigan to sort of man the battlements, or we've come over to Annapolis from here to snag him for the weekend and spend some time with him, which we're happy to do, but it's like, you're right. I mean, it's very challenging. That's one child,
right.
who's 10 and pretty capable of taking care of himself on a lot of levels. But, it's absolutely a challenging kind of profession because the hours are all wrong for a family too. It's just inverted.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm always impressed when people are in the arts and they have family and they can make it work.
Yeah, it's important to note that me saying that is not saying that there aren't people that do it. I mean, there are lots of people who figure out a way to do both, and I admire them greatly for
Yeah.
figuring it out. I think it's very challenging, and I think some people rise to that challenge.
Yeah, I always joke that that the problem is that those people who are actors and have kids, they bring their kids to the theater, and then their kids get bitten by the bug.
Well, my kids,
It's so self-fulfilling.
we
They're like, oh no, they're going to have
we
to scrape together a living just the way I did.
that is the exact conversation that I had with my wife Lauren and talking about our kids, and we're keeping our eldest away, or trying to, and then I swear to you, we
They'll
started
sneak it out.
seeing how it was natural, and she was interested, and so, when you start seeing that spark as a parent, it doesn't really matter what the spark is in, you just want to feed it and kindle it.
Exactly. And she's genetically disposed, let's face it, right? I mean, I wasn't that surprised when my son wanted to be an actor. It's like
Yeah.
get raised around it. And he's to my way of thinking, he's the best actor in the family, actually. But and Alyssa's terrific too. I mean, they're really fine actors. But I had been so impressed with them. So when he decided to leave, I really knew that it was because he just wanted other things, and
Yeah.
acting wasn't fulfilling him on some level. And the thing he said to me that I was most impressed with, he said when we talked about it, he said, "I found I wasn't missing it." And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I mean, because I think people go through stages in their life. I got into his age range and found I was missing it. I was really missing it, and I had to go test it out. And he'd had a lot of experience in it, and decided when there was a gap that he had no control over, he at least looked inward enough to go, oh, I'm not really missing this. Maybe I'll go and do something else. I think that's interesting. Sometimes we get into the habit of doing something and we forget to interrogate, am I still enjoying this? And I think it's a tough question right now in theater because so many theaters have closed down. There's as a result, there's less stage work,
Mhm.
available. You have a shift in what people are feeling obligated to offer on stage. The various concerns that are at the forefront of society, various political concerns and ideas. The dreaded words now of diversity and inclusion, and that that we have a government that's trying to make us not use, because it's so threatening to their hold on power. Um, it's like, but I mean, that has impact. It certainly has an impact for, and this is not to whine. A white guy in his 60s doesn't get to whine, but for a white guy who's past 60 now, you know, with what theaters are shifting toward, the plays that they're selecting to do, and things they're looking to examine, the ways they're looking to um, reconsider classical plays, the roles that once were default to me, and available are not going to be around as much, and that's okay. I'm all right with that. And I was in a season where I played certain roles that tracked me into a kind of area that it doesn't arise naturally out of my soul. I was playing old white racist guys, and when you engage that a lot, it's hurtful, it wears on you a bit. But I also realized it was important and valuable to be there and fulfill that space. But you have to sort of be aware that there are those trends as well. And I think that's some of the challenge in the discipline, and in the vocation, and in the profession, and whatever you want to call it, that we're feeling
Mhm.
now. It's that there's a lot of shifting ground. It's one thing to have a couple of things shift, but to have it feel like everything's in flux is pretty challenging.
Well, in the face of all of the change, because the world has changed so much, both from pre-COVID to COVID to now post-COVID, and then the political landscape. I mean, everything just feels like in so much turmoil. What is your view of the function of theater in society? What does it do for us as a culture?
So you couldn't come up with a big question? You were going to go with that?
If you can
Yeah.
just, answer that in a
Yeah, yeah,
short
no, it's
soundbite for me, something that I could
a couple
easily
of
share
sentences.
on Instagram.
Well, there's theater's always necessary. Do you know what I mean? It's always the ground on which we confront our deepest concerns and fears. And I think this goes back to that sort of sacred sensibility. We can go back to Aristotle's Poetics and the idea of catharsis, and whatever that is. And it's been argued about, this purging of the emotions of pity and fear in the audience. But I think, you know, we come together to experience that because it has a fundamental emotional value for us. Now, it's a really interesting question in this culture. I was coming out of teaching my class the other day, and I walked down the hallway, and even students who were walking together, they either had their phone in their hand or up in front of their face as they're walking with somebody else. I would say about 90% of them were not actually interacting with the person next to them. So it's a really interesting question in this moment. I too, like I teach film. I don't go to the movies as often as I used to. I stream the content, and I feel a little ashamed saying so, I also stream National Theater from, they have a platform of streaming content of their stage shows, and I can't get over to England to see those shows. So it's wonderful that I get to watch them, and I get to share with my class a stage performance of Medea with Helen McCrory, rest in peace, the great Helen McCrory, and
Yeah.
it's just it's pretty fantastic, but it's not the same as being in the room where it happens, to quote a fairly famous musical of recent years. And I there's something magic that happens there, and having worked in a particularly interactive theater at the Blackfriars in Stanton, where the audience is so immediate and in the light, and we were encouraged to contact them and draw them in different ways. You realize just how magical it can be and how transformative it can be. So it's a big question. There's a book called The Necessity of Theater, and I'm trying to remember. I think it's Paul Woodruff is the name of the author of it. But I read it a number of years ago, and at the recommendation of a wonderful theater and Shakespeare scholar at University of Texas, James Lowland. And Woodruff, I believe, had been one of his professors, and he had talked about this book, and I heard Woodruff speak as well at a conference. But it's a great book because it sort of digs down into why do we as a culture need this? Like, what does it answer in us? And he gets at some of that. He talks about spectacle in general. We love spectacle. Like I was watching Arsenal play Real Madrid in Madrid, yesterday, and that was theater. Let me tell
Yeah.
you. I mean, and the Spaniards in Madrid bought theater with everything they had to trying to get their team to come back, and it was marvelous to watch, and it was moving. And I can tell you, I couldn't sit still in the whole first half. I'm not that kind of a sports fan usually, but it was, exciting. I'm like, I would not have taken my blood pressure during that game because my doctor would be would be displeased with it. But I mean, I feel that way when I'm at really moving theater. Like it's hard to stay in my seat. I'm
Mm,
excited by it and engaged by it. So uh, I don't know that that value goes away. I don't know that we're making it available to the people it needs to be made available to as much as we should. You look at the price of theater tickets and the like, I mean, young people, no, what young person can afford to go see Othello in New York? Not that you'd necessarily want to, I guess, from the reviews I've heard, but it's like it's Denzel and everything, but if only the 5% or the 1% can afford the ticket price to go see it, the question becomes, well, your question, who's this for? What's this for?
right.
And certainly it's hard to imagine that it's challenging the status quo mores if it's being sold to the people who are dominant within that status quo.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe theater has to get back to more basics and go to the streets a little bit more to recoup itself. You know, maybe the mainline theater can't help but sell out at some level. I don't know. I mean, it happens in Hollywood too, right? You
So,
get really fine films, but then you get films that clearly were focus grouped and uh, you know uh, they lack the courage maybe of their original screenplay. You know what I mean?
yeah.
They get dulled down into the ordinary everyday thing that you expect, and it becomes pablum as opposed to anything challenging.
So I've had a thought that I don't think I've ever actually articulated, and I want to articulate it and see what your response is to it.
It's terrifying.
Wh-
Go ahead.
Which is that maybe the future of theater is a return to community theater, but in a new and improved sort of format, and also maybe in a format that recognizes our limitations of community are fundamentally different in the digital space. So we could, instead of be talking about just a geographic community, we could also be talking about, the Shakespeare loving community. We could be talking about the queer LGBTQ community. We could be talking about the classical community, and as many as you can think of. But um, I don't know, that has run through my brain so many times, and I don't think I've actually ever brought it up to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, the Irish Rep during COVID had a couple of shows that I paid tickets for and watched. Endgame with Bill Irwin and it was great to be able to access them that way. But as I was watching them, I was like, and really appreciating the acting, the performance was fine. But I was like, and I felt like I wasn't at a movie, but I also wasn't entirely at theater either. because I've been to a play at the Irish Rep, and you know, being there is different from being there, virtually being there.
Hmm.
So it's a really interesting kind of dilemma. I mean, I'm really thrilled that platforms like Shakespeare's Globe in London has a player, and they have archived, recorded versions of their plays where you can see the audience there at the Globe in a performance, responding to the performance. And I've used those in class to say, this is Shakespeare. This is how it looked for Shakespeare, at least closer to how it looked,
Yeah.
and I know that it's that there's camera work, there's close-ups, it's been orchestrated and directed for recording so that it's not theater, that people are on occasion showing you where to look, as opposed to the
Hmm.
actor attracting your attention and those kind of things. And the immediacy of theater is not there, the changeability, the possibility of you know my interaction, my even emotional, and this from being on stage yourself. You can feel an audience,
Hmm.
and you can feel when they're with you and when they feel like they're not with you, and or checked out in some way, you know. So that those National Theater archived performances, those Globe performances, yeah, I'm really happy they're there. The thing I liked about the Irish Rep performances were that they were timed. It was happening while you were watching,
Yeah.
so there was something gratifying about that, knowing that you were seeing the play being put on in real time, and you felt like your ticket was worth it. For the other services, you just pay a price, a membership price, and you have access to a whole bunch of different plays and their recordings, and you understand that. But it's still great. It's
Yeah.
not a movie. It's clearly a performance on stage. There's audience there that you get to see and appreciate. So, in what you're discussing, which model are we talking about? Are you
Mm.
talking more about like a hybrid where there's a performance going on, but we also live stream it to people who want to pay a different kind of ticket and have a different kind of experience? And will the people in the theater then feel the same about their ticket if they know that's happening, and that they're present? Or, it's so interesting, and to say nothing of contracts for talent and the like, and how you manage all that, in
Yeah.
different unions and the like. But it's it's just one of those puzzles right now. When I look at it, I think I don't know enough, and I feel like I'm not smart enough to answer that question. I am impressed by people who run theaters at this moment, because they're having to make all of these decisions and think about these things in creative ways, and see where's the path forward and what's the best way to honor the art, honor the profession, honor the people involved on both sides, the people who are producing it and the people who are consuming it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that was a great big roundabout dodge of that question.
No, no, I don't think so. I think it's sort of one of Stageable's kind of fundamental questions. And the important distinction for me is not to get caught up in form too much. And so if we're thinking about community and community building and community connection, it's important not to tie that to anything so specific because the forms will inevitably change. The way we do that will be different with cameras, will be different with the technology of a stage will be different than the technology of AI and maybe potentially augmented reality or 3D. I mean, the possibilities are very different, but the central function of theater, I would think, remains the same. Um, and and I do think it has something to do with temporal. I mean, I think that's a part of it, that there is this liveness, there is this ability for things to go. You don't know how things will really go. Um, and so there's an anticipation that's built into the experience, much like when you watch the Arsenal game and you don't know the outcome. Um, but I think the experience of watching it from your couch and the experience of watching it in the stadium are two totally different things,
Radically different. Radically
and
different.
different than being a player, and different than being a coach on the sideline. Uh,
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. I mean, my wife and I were lucky enough to get to see Hamilton on stage on Broadway with Lin-Manuel Miranda in it, and we had sixth row seats, and I felt like I'm pretty sure he spit on me, and I didn't want to wash it off. It was awesome,
that's awesome.
and and that's that musical that has I just want to be in the room where it happens, and I
Yeah.
referenced it earlier, but it's like then I watched it on Disney, the recorded version. It was an excellent recording of it. It could not touch what it meant to be there, especially in New York. When the girls, the Schuyler sisters, sing that New York City number in New York, the audience went berserk. I mean,
Yeah.
insane. And you could tell that there were people at that very expensive play who had been to multiple performances. You could tell by the way they were reacting that they had
Yeah.
already been here for this play, you know. And, at the end of that play, we wept. I mean, the interaction between Hamilton and his wife, and it felt so Shakespearean to me, that play.
Hmm.
Like pure, like the kind of Shakespeare we did, the immediate Shakespeare. It felt like that. It felt there was the stage was bare. It felt like there were soliloquies, even though it was rap. Even though the nature of the music, and it was one of the most moving performances I've ever been to. Like
Hmm.
and to have been there and see it live, the ephemeral nature of it, the fact that it happened that night, that performance will never happen again, and I was there.
Yeah.
Special. I
Yeah.
once taught a class on Shakespeare for they called it Elder Hostel at the time, Academy of Lifelong Learning kind of thing. So I was younger then, and there were a lot of older people in the room, people in their 60s and 70s, and we were talking about Julius Caesar. And I made reference to Orson Welles' production of Julius Caesar right before he made Citizen Kane. Mercury Theater did this production of Julius Caesar, and just before World War II as well. So it had a whole cast about the nature of fascism in it, and two people in my class said, "Oh yeah, we were at that. We saw that performance on
Hmm.
And I was just like, you what? I just envy you so much that you were able to see that. I couldn't have. I wasn't born, so that my envy makes no sense. But you know, um, it was pretty remarkable to have them
Yeah.
say that they had seen it. They were very young when they'd seen it, but yeah. So
There's that made me think of as I've been exploring this, I've been noticing how important the relational element is and the people are. Um, in that same way, right? You referenced seeing Lin-Manuel Miranda in person in New York, which is very different than seeing the touring cast. And I'm sure the touring cast is spectacular, but the, seeing him play that role had a special significance. And um, I think about all of the amazing roles that you have played that I wasn't able to partake in, which is a very sad thing. But
yeah, it is sad. You really missed out, Ben.
I know, and there is no archival footage, and I
There
don't
is
know that
archival
I'll.
footage of all of it. There's
Well,
yeah, you don't have access, but unless you're a scholar, but they've
right.
archived all those. I don't know how good they are, or I've never seen them, but we did, record all of those performances. So
What
somewhere,
about Long Day's Journey into Night?
I think there's an archival performance of that as well. I think
Oh,
there is at American Stage Theater.
okay.
So that was a great experience.
Yeah, I would have loved to
Yeah,
have seen that play.
play play rips your guts out. Yeah.
So, do you mind me asking about your approach I mean, you've played Iago, you've played King Lear, you've played all of these iconic roles. What do you do when you approach these mammoths of literature.
Well, I don't think of them that way, I guess, first of all, in that context, when I'm teaching them, in the classroom, I certainly think of them that way. And, I remember being in a classroom at my undergrad at College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts. I had a great Shakespeare professor, and he unlocked like King Lear for me. He made me understand the play. He made me see it for the great thing that it is. So, I mean, all of that stuff's there and it underpins that. Um, but I mean, first things first is, learn the damn lines kind of thing. Like you come back to the text. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't mean to be flippant. I mean, the text is rich and it offers so much. And so, I think all the people that I worked with, or the great majority of them, one of the great honors of working in that core company, at the American Shakespeare Center was that there was a kind of unified approach and sense of discipline about the text, that the verse mattered, the text mattered. So, and even with O'Neill, I mean, that's very scrupulous work was done by a very great writer,
Yeah.
writing out of his own personal experience that he then didn't want to have put on stage, but his wife luckily didn't pay any attention to him after he died. Um, you know, um, and you can feel that in the text how honest and pure it is, I guess. So I mean, I start there. I start with and not to sound too precious about it, but to be humble before it, to be humble before the text, and realize that it has things to teach me, and to try to be available to that, and then to not get so locked into my decisions that I can't hear what someone else is offering. And um I like working with directors because, they challenge what I've come up with, or they guide what I've come up with, and they shape it, and they make me rethink things. Same reason I love working with other actors who have the same level of commitment, because if I've done that kind of dive and preparation, then they have too. And they bring things that surprise me. And I just have to be available to that. It's the old improv thing, right? I have to say yes and, as opposed to
Mm.
no, but I was doing this over here. And every now and then I think fear does put you in that alley, you know,
Yeah.
we're saying, no, no, this is what I'm doing, kind of a thing. And you get locked into it. But, your Lear's going to be better if you have a great fool. Your
Mm.
Lear's going to be better if you have great actors playing your daughters. The crowd makes the king. So even the way Burgundy behaves to you is going to
Yeah.
make you, your Kent is going to be important because Kent stays loyal to you. And so, even though you've treated him badly, he stays loyal to you. So he's convincing the audience that you're worthy of caring about just by
Hmm.
his very presence. So you need a good Kent,
Yeah.
and that's why, I mean, it's not, you're never out there alone. I mean, I've even watched people in a one man show, like um, uh, an Iliad. I've seen a couple of performers do that, and there's a musician out there with them. That's called for, whether it's a cellist or some other musician that they've decided to, a harpist. I've seen it with, worked great with both,
Hmm.
but they're not out there alone. And you also know that they've been directed, and you can, even if I don't think you should feel the direction necessarily, but watching the production that it's been guided,
Hmm.
especially if you're an actor, that. So, I mean, and then there's all the effects that are going on, that the other technical support. So, I mean, it's like you do everything that you can do. I even costumes, like I had this. I'm coming back to Lear, I guess, because we mentioned it, but I had this wolf cape for Lear, this leather coat with a wolf kind of,
Hmm.
mantle on it. And it was a lot easier to feel like Lear with that thing on than it was without it. I mean, it's just like it changed things as soon as I put it on, and
Hmm.
when you have, costumes like that that support what you're doing, and a costumer that listens to you when you try to explain that a costume's fighting you, and not in a good way, and they listen to you and try to work with you. Um, the collaboration is all over the place. So, I mean, I prepare by, I mean, you do everything you can to be ready, I think, or I do everything I can to be ready. And then the thing I work hardest to be is humble and available in the rehearsal room, you know. Um, and I know that people I have worked with would comment variously on my success level with that, you know, but we're all flawed and we do what we can, you know.
So we, I've been doing some work on mission, vision, and core values in my business practices, which is, you'll see it all over the entrepreneurship and business books.
Hmm.
Um, and you're being instructed to name things that are already inherent within the organization. You're not really trying to come up with them,
Gotcha. Yeah,
and then
yeah.
apply
You're
them.
identifying things more.
And and so collaboration was one of the things that came up very early, and it's always been there, but I've been working that muscle and that core value in the businesses more recently, and I've been reintroduced to the idea that collaboration is what makes the alchemy possible, where 1 plus 1 equals 5, or 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 10. It's like what you talked about, that the you bring in your ideas and then they're in conflict, and you think that that conflict is going to destroy both,
Mhm.
but instead something new is born, and
Yeah,
it's better than anyone could have come up with.
yeah. If you can be receptive, right? If you
Yeah.
can be receptive to it, and that doesn't mean you won't struggle and you won't fight it a little bit. That it might be the third rehearsal that you come to,
Yeah.
where you go, oh, this is what you've been trying to show me this whole time, and I've been fighting it and afraid of it and trying to stay away from it, and I shouldn't have. I should have dove into it. Should have dived into it. I couldn't decide which was right there. But I was thinking of a director that my son worked with who would say on occasion, they'd be doing a rehearsal and they'd say, well, so an actor would say, well, you told me to do this the last time we did this, and the director would go, well, that direction has expired. And I thought, well, that's really good. It's like, it's not
Yeah.
that it was wrong. It was like, it
Yeah.
was what was working in that moment. But this other thing has now happened and there's something better on offer. So that's had an expiration date and it's gone now. We can't make use of that anymore. And I thought, that's a not unuseful way of thinking of it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the theory that comes to mind is the sunk cost. It's like you're tied to something because of past thinking, and the willingness to be open and be like, whatever was, I can put aside, and I'm available for what might be.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in a production of The Tempest that was directed by Giles Block, who was the master of text at the Globe in London. And what a wonderful man to work with. But my wife was at the rehearsal, and we talked about this afterwards because we were doing a scene, and he would pause after the scene, and he'd sort of stand there watching, and um, he'd say, "Yes, okay, so what I'm learning is," and then he'd talk, But I thought, what a great thing for a director to say. I mean, it's so humble, it's so present, and it's so focused on generosity and what the actors are giving. You know what I mean? It's like it's an actor who's directing there. He understands actors, and he's saying these people are teaching me about this play because they're all intelligent, they're all making choices that are invested, and I can learn things from that and I can guide it, but only if I'm really paying attention to it and present for it. And I was like, I haven't done a lot of directing. I've done some, but I mean, it sort of set a bar for me.
Yeah.
It's like if you're going to have an objective, that's the objective,
Yeah.
is to be in the room to learn and not to teach. And, even as a teacher, it's the thing you try to apply too. It's like, what do my students have to teach me today?
Mm.
Because, they have wisdom and they have freshness and availability, and they'll see things new that I've been looking at for years, and
Right.
some things about it I can't see anymore, so,
Yeah.
and that's the thing about being prepared too. You get as prepared as you can with your part, and then somebody's going to come and show you something that you just missed. You never even
Hmm.
saw it, you know, or they're going to use a prop in a way, and you're like, oh, you know, I have a
Yeah.
later scene, and the way they use that prop, if I bring it back in that later scene, and suddenly it's there, and it was nowhere. It wasn't there till they walked in the room.
Yep. That's, it's like, it's magic. I
It's
mean, that's magic.
it's what draws us.
Hmm.
It's because things like that can happen. And that's why I want to be in the room where it happens.
Man, well, I can't think of a better way for us to kind of put a little bow on our
Good.
conversation.
That's a
That's
button.
it. That's a button.
Yeah.
And we're right about at time. So I want to just,
Cool, man.
uh, we need to do this again, I think, because you've got so many interesting things to
Oh, James,
say.
you know that.
I love it.
Love it.
Well,
Love you.
thank you for being here, James. I
Oh,
really, really appreciate it.
you're
And
welcome, my brother.
yeah, we will
Let's
catch
act
everybody again soon.
soon. Let's perform together again soon.
Let's put that out into the
Get
universe.
out
Let's
into
make
the
it happen.
universe. Let's make that happen. All right, brother.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.